Well, hello, dads, and welcome to the Dad Nation podcast. My name is Jason Braun, and I am co-host of this podcast, and I am here alongside my great friend and co-host of this podcast with me, Matt Crittenden, and we are both active participants and players in a organization called Dad Camp, which is the parent organization of this podcast, and we just believe that when you reach a father, you reach a family. We are on mission to see a world where every family has a great dad. And so if you are a dad, this podcast is for you.
Yes.
And so, Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Been up since early this morning. Already ran for an hour on the treadmill and feel energized and pumped up.
You
ready
are
to go.
Well ahead of me in the exercise world today, as you normally are. We haven't seen each other for a bit, so it's exciting to kind of hang out again with you. And we've had a busy past month, and hopefully we've got plenty of new listeners after last month's opportunity that we had to be involved at Northview Church's first ever, I think, parenting conference.
Yeah.
And they invited us to be a part of that and set up the podcast live, and that was the first time we'd ever done that. And we were really blessed to have Pastor CJ Johnson and his wife Kristen join us last month for just a chance to get to know them and just to hear their hearts about family and specifically about fatherhood. But they really shared some great stuff.
They did.
Really enjoyed just getting to know them and hearing from them, but they were coming right out of a main session that they had just taught, and then we kind of bombarded them with some more questions about fatherhood specifically and family. But any thoughts from last month's episode? Any big takeaways that you had as we spent time with them?
Yeah, first of all, I just had a blast. It was so much fun for myself and you and James to get on there, and thank you to Northview Church and Pastor CJ and Kristen just for taking a break from that transition from their main session to come talk to us. That was really a blessing. One big thing that stood out to me, probably the most, I guess, impactful thing was when I asked Kristen about roles that a dad plays that only a dad, can do that in the home. And just in general, she answered that question, but the way that she answered that specifically about Pastor CJ, man, I was tearing up. Sitting there seeing the look on her face and hearing it in her voice of the rock that he is for the family, protector, a refuge. We see that in the Word about God being that for us. And if we're submitting to Christ, I think Him living in us, that dads, we can be that to our wives and our kids as well. So that was... Yeah,
it was such an honoring thing that she did. She wasn't prepared for that question.
Right.
I remember her saying, He's our umbrella.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, if, as a dad, as a husband, to have your wife say, he's our umbrella.
Right.
What a powerful blessing. I thought.
Absolutely.
That she gave him. And CJ, I asked him kind of at the very end, if you could offer up one thing to a dad, if this is your last chance to shoot a word of encouragement to the fathers out there, what would he say? And I thought what he said, it's something we talk about a lot at Dad Camp, talk a lot about on this podcast, but the way that he said it just summed it up. What he said, I think I would tell dads that, how you break the generational curse is by breaking the generational choice. Mm-hmm. And that was just such a profound statement.
Yeah.
And as I listen to him, he's really good at creating these types of profound statements. But how you break, dads, the generational curse that you see in your family, different patterns of behavior or choices. It's by breaking the generational choice. And he said, my dad or my grandpa may have chose some of these things,
right?
But I'm going to change the choice, and it's going to change the trajectory,
right, of
my family. And I just thought of what a powerful way to sum up a really big thought. And I know that's hard. there's a lot of work sometimes that needs to be done with
Absolutely.
with breaking some of these curses, and some of these choices require a lot of healing, a lot of counseling, a lot of other things. But if he could, he said if dads could just break these generational curses by breaking, the generational choices,
Yes.
that would be his advice. And it was that's strong. So, I mean, dads out there listening, take that to heart and put that to work. So, I just got back, Matt, from Guatemala.
Yes. How was that?
2 days ago, I think now that we came back after a week. This was, we hadn't been there since May of last year. And in that space of time, we have hired our first international staff member of Dad Camp. His name's Oso Morales. And so this trip was, Oso was in charge. And so we were going down to assist him, to train him, to be there to say, hey, as we put on Dad Camp events, we wanted to be supportive of him, but to just talk about how it went, what we could do differently, what we could tweak, what we could do better,
right?
How we could build out his team. But it was Oso in charge with us, supporting. And we did 4 events over the week.
Nice.
That he planned and got a team together for. And, then we had several leadership training kind of meetings. But I wanted to share, because we're just excited to have Oso and his story. And something he shared with us at the end of the week was his parents live in the United States now. And there was a point in his life several years ago where he had left Guatemala to go back up to the States, and thinking he's going to stay there and create a life up here. And he said he just sensed strongly that God said, you need to go back to Guatemala and you're going to preach. And for Oso, he's not a guy that's been through seminary. He wasn't in a position of any type of authority or influence in the church, and so getting that calling he didn't have much context for that or space for that or understanding how that would work. But he did. But he said, I went back. I trusted God and followed him. And that's been several years ago. And so that hasn't really been coming to fruition, I guess. And there's been some frustration or some, God, I thought I'm available. I'm ready. I think I'm ready.
Right.
And, but that just wasn't coming. Well, our very first night of Dad Camp, he had lined up a couple of different people to do the speaking for the event. He was coordinating and leading, but he had identified different teachers, pastors that he thought were coming to teach. Well, there was just some miscommunication on the first night, and the event's ready to go, and we don't have our teacher there.
Ooh.
And I was like, hey, do you need me to step in and get out some notes and do something here? Like, what are we going to do? It was go time. Dads were there. Kids were there. We're ready to go.
No speaker.
Kind of important. And he said, Jason, I actually wrote this material, and I passed it on to the teachers for them to get comfortable with and communicate. But he goes, I do know it, so I think I'm gonna just step in here and do it. I'm like, go for it.
Yeah.
And wow, I didn't know that about Oso. I know a lot of things about him, but I didn't know that part of him in terms of a communicator, just because he'd never been given the space to do it.
Right.
And so suddenly I found myself in the back of the room, and he just jumped in. He was natural. He was gifted. The guys were with him. He was engaging, authentic, humble. And it was just, I was like, God's gifted this young guy to be a communicator. And
wow.
I didn't know until the end of the week, the story of him, God saying, go back to Guatemala and preach.
Yeah.
And so here was, the answer to that calling, and God saying, you trusted me, and it just took some time to prepare you.
Right.
And here he was preaching in the Dad Camp context, and he's not even a dad yet, but he is passionate about it and believes in it, and
That's awesome.
he has a story to tell. And for us, it was just so exciting to be like, this is the future. Like
Yeah.
Oso's our guy, and he's going to continue to lead, but to actually be like, he's actually going to be a communicator and teacher, and he's just going to get better and better as God leads him, and he stays obedient. So that was an awesome surprise, I guess. That wasn't expected, and that's something that came out of it. For me, one of the most powerful things outside of that was we had a dad camp. So we did 4 dad camps. I taught one of them. Oso taught 2, and another pastor taught 1. But the one that I was teaching, there was a 16-year-old young man there with his 2 sisters because they're fatherless. And somehow he found out about dad camp, and for whatever reason, he stepped up. And I took a picture of them. He had his arms around them and was praying over them at the end of the event. And
sisters?
His younger sisters.
Okay.
They were probably 8 and 10.
Yeah.
And he's 16.
Yeah.
But to see the 3 of them, embraced, and he was praying over them and saying, I got to step up. And I'm sure he's scared and has no idea what he's doing, but he's doing whatever he can. And it was powerful to see that. That's an image for me that, and it's been convicting me lately of what can we do to empower, equip these young men that are in positions like this young man to have to play the father role in a family where dad has abandoned them essentially. Right. And so what can we do as a ministry to equip them and ready them? And because he was willing. He's there. What a power! It was a powerful moment. So, great trip to Guatemala. While we're in Guatemala, we heard and found out news the whole world's been watching, and that's from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Matt, you and I have been to Ukraine.
Yes,
we've served in Ukraine together. We helped, take dad camp to Ukraine. We have partners in Ukraine. We are even in dialogue just before all this this happened about establishing a director there and expanding our influence and presence in Ukraine.
Right.
We have friends there that we've been in their homes, eating dinner, mm-hmm. breaking bread,
yes,
praying. This is tough.
It is. It is.
I know we've been keeping up together with the news from them and how things are going. But why don't you maybe share a little bit about what you've heard, what you're feeling, with our friends there.
Yeah, one of the ministries that partnered with us, the director of that ministry, who's also a pastor, just been in contact with him over the last week and a half, and I guess there's 2 sides of the coin is the way I look at it. The one side is my heart breaks for them, and to hear some of the struggles, some of the unknowns, some of the anxiety and fear that obviously comes in when you don't know what's going to happen with you and your family, and you're hearing gunshots and you're hearing, explosions going off, and these things are happening close to where you're living. And last week I just sort of sat in that and was trying to put myself in his shoes. He's a husband. Mm-hmm. He's got 2 teenage children. He's a pastor of a church, and he's the director of a ministry that helps orphans once they've timed out of orphanages there. And I thought about the numbers of people that are looking to him for leadership, looking to him for guidance and wisdom and protection, and what a weight that must be. I think he's well equipped to handle it, and I'm sure he welcomes it, but all of us men know that can be a really heavy weight when there's a lot of people depending on you. And so that's one of the things that I was just praying for him, that God would give him that strength and that wisdom and that discernment to lead those that are looking to him. And then you and I sort of talked about before we started this story of getting some people out into a safe area. But I've also been encouraged by their faith.
Been amazing.
It's been amazing to hear, we're going through this and we're going through that, and here's the challenges, but praise God, praise God, because he's still with us. He's our protector. He's our refuge. No matter what circumstances are going on around us, we trust him. He's good. And whether we understand the whole plan and how he's working in it, we trust that he is here. He's here for us. He's protecting us. And we've heard some stories, the story that you shared with me, and we both saw about the woman who was going to go have a baby and just felt something like she should go to a different hospital than the one she normally goes to. And the one that she didn't go to got shelled. And now she had her baby and has a healthy baby. The story of some of the people who they needed to evacuate who got across the border quicker and easier than most people have been able to do. So just seeing God's hand on them and hearing that their faith is strong despite their circumstances.
It just reminds me of the hope of the gospel.
Yes.
And what separates those that don't carry that hope and those that do, that our hope isn't in this world, and these kinds of things are going to happen, and they're absolutely tragic and horrific and unfair and unjust, but we have a hope that's beyond, and
right.
To see them put that hope in action has been just powerful for me to be connected to. And the center that Matt's referring to is called Last Bell. You can look them up on lastbell.org. And their prayer, their request for us, and I hope that those of you listening will join us, and we've been praying this for them, but is to pray Psalm 91, 1 through 7 over them. And so we've been doing that. In fact, in Guatemala, I was asked to come up at the church service I went to and just say a welcome. And I just said, I did that really briefly. And I said, hey, can we turn our attention for a moment to our friends in Ukraine? And we opened up the scripture, and we as a church in Guatemala opened up Psalm 91 and prayed that over them. And so we would ask that you would all do that and continue to do that over our friends at Last Bell. If you feel led to donate to their cause and their needs, they're taking care of these orphans and these young moms, and that are taking care of their children and are essentially homeless. And they've moved several of them now to Poland, but there's a lot of financial need there to continue meeting those needs. But at lastbell.org, they have a donate button, and you can choose actually humanitarian or war relief as one of the choices. And so if that would be something you'd feel led to do, we will 100% stand behind them and say that they are absolutely legit. We've been there.
Yes.
We've seen it. We've prayed with them in person. We've ministered with them. We've done dad camp together with these folks. And they are in Zhytomyr, Ukraine, which is just west of Kyiv. And so they are experiencing explosions and bombings in real time. Our other partners are west of there, about 3-4 hours, in a town called Ternopil. So there, things haven't quite evolved to that level of with the bombings and things, but they are. This center has become a refugee center, to where they literally sent a picture of how they look after about 300 kids each week. They disciple about 300 kids. We've done dad camp there with their families, and literally the room that we did dad camp in has become a place for refugees. About 40 refugees are fitting in this room, and I think they've already had their first wave, and then they moved them on, and then more people are coming in, and they're taking in folks as they're moving through that area and onto Poland. And so they're the Center for Training Success in Ternopil. And again, they also have needs. They're trying to take on these refugees and cover their costs and be a refuge for them. And they're doing all of their donations through an organization called Orphans Promise, which is a larger ministry throughout Ukraine. And but you can go to orphanspromise.org/standwithukraine and make a donation there. You can't designate to the Center for Training Success in Ternopil. So what you need to do there is take a screenshot, essentially, of your donation when you get it, get a confirmation from Orphans Promise, and you can then send that on to another email. And this is, if you can It's called it's center.uspikh@gmail.com. Center.uspikh@gmail.com. And then just tell them, hey, that you made a donation through Orphans Promise, that you wanted to go to them, and then they will actually contact Orphans Promise and say, hey, we have evidence that there's been some donations that came in through you, because it's clunky, but this is how things are set up. And so again, both of these ministries are doing incredible work. They're incredible people, and so our hearts go out to them. So continue to lift them up. Psalm 91. And again, if you want to financially give, they have significant financial needs there. So, it's hard to talk about. I mean, I don't know about you, but lots of tears have flowed as we've spent time praying for them and just getting their updates. And we love you guys. If you're listening in Ukraine, we love you, and
we do.
We absolutely are lifting up as much as we can, and we'll continue to. So, let's shift here as we back half of this podcast to another conversation about fatherhood and becoming a stronger dad. And we have been really since the beginning of this podcast, for the most part, working through conversations out of a book called The Dad Difference by Brian Loritz. And the subtitle of the book is The 4 Most Important Gifts You Can Give Your Kids. And we spent several episodes talking about the first of those 4 gifts, which is the gift of relationship. And we've just talked how we can gift relationship to our kids and how to build that relationship so that we can have influence. The second of those 4 most important gifts was the gift of integrity. We spent a few episodes talking through that lens on giving that gift of integrity to our kids. The third gift, which is where we're at now. We've done an episode or 2 now, and we'll spend another one today. And that gift is the gift of teaching. And so the gift of teaching and how that passes on. So today we wanted to just kind of work through a model of discipline, a way that we teach as dads and we pass on the gift is through how we discipline, how we correct our kids, how we raise them up. And so I just wanted to acknowledge first off the top that we all parent differently.
Sure. We
respect that. We acknowledge that. And we need to parent differently, even when it comes to our own children, because they're different.
Right.
And we can't, there's a basic structure I think that we can create and have as we parent. But, the way that we correct is often different based on the situation, based on the temperament and the personalities of our kids. And so we want to say off the top that, there's not a singular, this is how you do it approach. And we understand that. But there was he has a paragraph to start one of the chapters here in the book. Chapter 12 is what we're working from if you have the book and you've been reading through it. But I want to read this because this is, as I read it, this is how it was in my house growing up. And honestly, it's kind of how my wife and I have raised our kids too. And so as I read, I was like, this resonates with me. Again, we all parent differently, and this may not resonate with you. But I just thought it'd create some conversation. But he says that we did not have a timeout ministry. He says ministry. I like that. We didn't have a timeout ministry in our house. There was no counting to 3. There was no parental pleading for us, as he's speaking from the kids' point of view, for us to obey, or there was no going back and forth.
Right.
In the Loritz home, you got one time to get it right, and if you didn't, there were consequences. And that was what I grew up in. Again, this wasn't an abusive environment. But it was just, it was very clearly communicated to me from the very beginning as I was able to understand that, when what mom and dad say, you obey, you follow.
Right.
And if I don't, there will be consequences. So that's just how it was. There wasn't, like you said, a pleading of back and forth, like, let's negotiate here. No, it was just, here's what I've asked you to do.
Right.
Now you're either going to do it or you're not.
Yeah.
And if you don't, did that connect to you, or was it different?
Yeah, that resonated with me. It was like there was a line, and it was like if you step over that line, you can't take it back. And so once you step over that line, you're understanding the consequences that sit on the other side of that. And another thing that resonated with me from that chapter was he said, I forget how I'm sort of paraphrasing, but he said if you were willing to act a fool, his mom was willing to act a fool with you, and she didn't have any space or time where she wouldn't go there with you. And I was raised by a single mom, and I think she had to be a little tough and had to, she's raising a boy on her own, and she had to set some limits and boundaries. And I remember if I was to get out of line, wouldn't matter if it was at home, if it was at the grocery store, is at a restaurant, at another family's home, it was in church. I saw that look on her face and was like, yep, I just stepped over that line, and there's no stepping back, and I already know what those consequences are going to be.
And as I thought about, we've kind of grown up, or what I've seen later on in life, what you see a lot now is this whole timeout approach. And again, not that that's not effective and not that it doesn't work here and there, but I think, when my kids were really young, that just wasn't an approach that my wife and I really went after. Like when our kids were just in that really toddler age, we just taught them, try to, like, hey, mommy said this, daddy said this, and then, you're going to, obey, but in a way that in a healthy way that they learn just that respect and that authority. That authority was a good thing. That authority was protective. That authority was not punishing but corrective, and it was out for their greater good.
Absolutely.
But the more leniency we would be, or the more we would negotiate, it just created more disorder and more, at least for us. And so, but I loved as he got into this. With that approach, he still did something that I think is profound. And author Brian Lurch said his dad, when there was time for correction and he knew that consequences were coming, though, his dad, before he would do that, would go on a prayer walk.
Prayer walks, yeah.
And it was his way as a father to collect himself, to think it through, to not be reactive with emotion, that he could. But it gave him the space and time to talk to God. And I loved how he said many times when I was there waiting for, like, okay, Dad's on his prayer walk, and I know it's coming when I get home. But his dad would come home, sit him down and say, God showed me on my prayer walk that he's given me grace for a lot of the mistakes that I've made in my life. Mm-hmm. And so today with this, you're going to get grace from me.
Right.
And that was it.
Right.
And I know, like, you were talking about his mom, like, being like, if you're going to act like a fool, then I'll act like a fool with you. And she would he said his mom would kind of look at her husband and be like, really? Like,
you're going soft on him?
That's it? But I think for the author, he's like, it was enough just sitting there waiting, knowing that the conversation was coming. That was almost the consequence in and of itself, like waiting for Dad and what's Dad going to say. And kind of sitting in that, I think, and knowing he's disappointed, his parents, was enough of a almost consequence. But his dad would just go on that prayer walk and just trust God's discernment and wisdom, and come back and say. And he said sometimes there's consequences, but other times there was this posture of grace. But when there were consequences, he talked about how they were calculated consequences, they were measured, and they were consistent.
Yeah, I think. Man, if there's any dads out there listening and you have not disciplined your children while you're in a moment of anger, man, you're killing it. You're nailing it out there.
Yeah,
because I know,
no doubt.
Jason, you have, and I know I have, and I think every dad out there, because they do stuff that just gets to you in the moment.
Yep.
And the thing is, react. So I really. That sort of resonated with me. Like I've had times where I've just been like, the reason for disciplining my children was correct, but my heart in it wasn't good. It was more punitive. It was to punish them. It was to make them pay for embarrassing me in the moment.
Right. You make it more about you than it really is about them, because, they're embarrassing me. I'm going to show them.
Right. And what do they learn from that? Okay, when we're frustrated or angry with someone, we lash out. That's basically what we're teaching them. So that was really good to see. I would suspect maybe Pastor Loritz, even in those moments, was praying while his dad was on a prayer walk too.
Yep.
And I think it's important to point out too, if you guys have been going with through the book with us, you've seen this, and both Jason and I can attest to this. Pastor Loritz had no lack of respect for his dad. He made a comment about, I think Mom thought Dad was being soft, but I don't think he thought that. I think he had a tremendous amount of respect for his dad, and there was nothing lost in that by his dad saying, hey, I'm going to go make sure my emotions are under control, come back under control, then we'll talk about how this is going to go.
Teaching thing in and of itself, that you're teaching your kids like that would have hey, cause as he grew up, I'm upset about something, whatever that is, and remembering how Dad handled this or would handle moments when he was upset. Really, really good. And then I loved how he said when he would then come back from the prayer walk, he would start the conversations by reading a chapter out of the book of Proverbs.
Right.
This, I can't even live to this guy's level, but and he said that then he would read a chapter from Proverbs, and he would always differentiate between, and I think you alluded to it earlier, the wise person and the foolish person. Mm-hmm. And he would say to Brian, he'd say, son, wise people listen and fools don't.
That's right.
So what are you going to do here? So here's my consequences. Here's what we're going to talk about. And are you going to listen, be a person of wisdom, or are you going to be and if you don't, here's the foolish camp, and he would use scripture to back it up. It wasn't like you're a fool. It's like here's God's word. Here's what God says about this, and he would always point it back to not so much disappointing him as a dad, but when you act this way, when you make these decisions, you're disappointing God.
Right.
And so he'd feel the weight of that, and so I thought that was good too. Just
it is
that whole coming back, open up a book of Proverbs, and I'm sure Brian's sitting there we get on with it already. What's coming? Can we get to it? But but using scripture as the template, using a prayer walk to calm the emotions, and then so then he goes into what he calls the ABCs of discipline, which is really kind of a summary, I think, where he talked about, but such a good way to kind of talk about this and remember it. So the ABCs are: the A is to address our anger, the B is to be in control, and the C is to correct, not punish. As you look at that, addressing our anger, being in control, correct, not punish, what thoughts there, Matt? What reflections there as you work through that and you think of how you've disciplined?
I think we've sort of hit the A and the B and some of the C as well. I guess the big picture for me is, and you and I have joked about this on the podcast before, but man, our poor first children, they get the first sort of rough version of us where we don't have much of it figured out, and we're working through it, and we're a work in progress. And I've got 3, so I think my second child, my oldest son, got a little bit better version of me. I was a little more polished up, had learned some things from my mistakes with my first. And then I think my youngest, my 11-year-old now, is probably getting the best version so far. I've had a lot of mistakes to make and a lot of things that I've been able to correct in that time. I love how Pastor Loritz talks about tying this to God.
Yeah.
And that's really one of the things that I've seen more in parenting my youngest now is the obedience to what myself or my wife is saying. I try to tie that to how there's obedience to God. And son, you may not always understand the why. I may not be able to explain that for you in the moment. You may not see why I'm telling you can't do something or why I'm insisting that you do. And I want you to know, in my life, it's often like that with God. Even for me as a grown man, that God says, don't do that. Don't look at that. Don't go near that. Stay away from that. Or God says, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to spend your time here or be with these people or use your finances in this way. Mm-hmm. I typically don't really understand the whole picture of why God is saying do or don't, but I trust him, and so I obey him because I know he has my best interest at heart. And that's sort of how I try to tie this in for really Kylan and for Braden. And so that resonated with me when he was talking about that in the chapter.
And I feel like I've grew in this area as well as my kids have got older, and did a better job. My kids are pretty close in age. Now they're 23, 21, and 19. But so when they were in, the teenage years, they're all there. Like it was 14, 16, 18, 15, 17, 19. I feel like I did better in those ages than early on. And it to your point, helping them understand why there needed to be consequences, but also to what you said, like, hey, you may not understand the why, but I'm going to try my best to explain it.
Yes.
So that then they could see that this was indeed correction, not punishment.
Right.
That's the C of these ABCs.
Right. And
that was helpful for them, especially as teenagers. So if you guys have teenagers out there, that when I would sit down with my teens and just have that conversation versus just delivering the consequence,
right? And
then they get even madder at me. They don't understand the why. They like, Dad's ridiculous. Like, these rules are dumb.
Yeah.
Why is he doing this? No, like, if we talk about it, they'd be like, there was that reaction, almost like I took that away from them. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they didn't like it some of the times.
Right.
They didn't, but the understanding was there.
Yes.
And that then helped us maintain relationship, which allows me to continue that influence in the future.
Right.
Versus just handing it down and they're just getting frustrated and even more angry with me. Our relationship gets severed. We maintain relationship through the consequences.
Right.
But it started with those first two, addressing my anger first, so I'm not just being reactive. Understanding, I think he points out well, that it's okay to be angry. Like, anger actually shows that we care. Anger actually shows that, that we're interested, we're invested here. But taking the time to cool off, and as he says in Ephesians 4:26, in your anger do not sin. So it's, you can be angry and not sin, but take a prayer walk, whatever that looks like, but remove yourself so that you can collect yourself, and then so that you can be in control.
Yes.
And then you can sit down and have a conversation with them. And even if they're too young, if you're not that place, you can sit down and have a conversation. You can still, though, react with control.
Absolutely.
Not out of your emotions. And so it allows you then to correct, for them to see that this is correction, not punishment. So I think this is a fantastic little approach. I think the wisdom in there is so good. But it seems simple, but it's not, because it's so often it feels personal. When our kids disobey us, we feel that personal, like, attack, or they've embarrassed me in public, or because of their behaviors. And we got to remember, it's not personal.
Right.
They're kids. They don't have it all figured out yet.
Yeah.
And so step back, take a pause.
And we've said it before in the podcast, this is to be expected.
Yes.
They're kids.
Yes.
So we shouldn't be surprised when they do things that we go, what in the world?
The temporary insanity.
Yeah, temporary insanity. We should expect it.
He closes by how you said, always trying to point it back towards the heart of God. And he says, it's ultimately the fear of God that we want in our correction. We want them to be in a position not of fearing us, but in fearing God. And that, again, that's not a bad thing. Right. God says, do not fear more than anything else in Scripture.
Yeah.
And he does say, though, fear one thing, fear me.
Fear him.
Why? Because as Kristen talked about CJ, he's our umbrella.
Yeah.
And he wants what's best for us. He created us. He knows what's best for us. And so fear him, trust him, live underneath that. I've said this, and I learned this, I think, from Andy Stanley, but he said, maximum freedom in life is found under the canopy of God's authority.
Yes.
We are most free when we live underneath his umbrella. And just found that to be true. And so one of my favorite verses, I say this all the time, guys probably listening that have heard this before are probably sick and tired of me saying this, but if my kids, if there's one verse my kids will say that Dad has taught us, it's the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Mm-hmm. If there's, a lot of verses out there, but they know I always go back to that. I say, guys, I want you to have success in life. I want you to, be purpose-filled and fulfill the mission that God has put. But to do that, you have to live wisely. And the only way to live wisely, God says, is to fear him. Like the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. If we don't fear him, there's no wisdom to move from.
Right.
And you look at the world around you. I tell my kids that all the time. Look at the world you live in. It's a chaotic, disorganized, dysfunctional, broken world. Why? Because we don't fear God.
Right.
And so people don't have wisdom, because that's where wisdom begins.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what you're living in. And so for your life to make sense and for it to be, for there to be purpose and contentment and joy and all those things that God gives us, we have to fall under his canopy.
Yeah.
That's where the freedom is. And
Yeah.
so
we see the consequences in our world of a lot of foolishness.
Yes.
And a lack of wisdom, like you said. And that fear, I fear disobeying God. Two big reasons. Number one, Jesus said, if you love me, you'll obey me.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm just in willful disobedience, it makes me question, am I really in love with Christ? Am I really loving God? The second part of that is, I know that if I'm disobeying God, there's some dire consequences on the other side of that. Sometimes I don't see them immediately. Sometimes they're not physical, they're spiritual. But I've learned that, man, I want to obey him because I fear the consequences of that disobedience. It's not a good thing for my life or those around me.
Right. So yeah, I think it's great stuff, guys. That's the gift of teaching, is we do that through how we correct, how we discipline. It's how we teach our kids. And so we can do that in a healthy way. We can do that in an unhealthy way. And I think this is such a healthy approach to correcting our children, and a healthy approach for us as dads, because we are, if anger, if there's an emotion that men we struggle with more than anything else, anger's probably one of at the top of the food chain there. And so stepping back in your anger, do not sin, collecting yourself, asking God for that discernment and wisdom of how to best approach a situation and correct, not punish our kids. Such good stuff. So
Amen.
We will be back in another month, but there's a lot happening right now in the dad camp world. Really quick, this podcast is coming out at the first Saturday of March. We have one more Dad Camp Fuel event. This is a 90-minute breakfast designed to charge you up as a father. They're awesome events, and we're going to be in Normal, Illinois at Eastview Christian Church, and the last day to register is tomorrow, if you're listening to this on the first Saturday of the month. So March, I guess that would be 6th, will be the final day to register. We've got a lot of guys registered. This is our first ever Dad Camp Fuel there. We are pumped about getting over there. And then we're going to be opening registration out of that event for Dad Camp in Illinois. It's going to be at Little Galilee Christian Camp. Is going to be where we're doing Dad Camp Illinois, and it's in May 20. I think the May 20th weekend is our Dad Camp Illinois, first ever. And so if you're listening and you're in the Midwest, even if you're one of our Indiana guys and you're like, you know what, I'd rather go to Dad Camp in the spring than in the fall.
Yeah,
it's only 3 hours from Indiana. Perfect little road trip for you guys to go to. New venue, new adventure. But if you are in the Illinois area, we are coming to you. So registration will open up on March the 12th for that. Also, Dad Camp Nebraska, if you're in that part of the United States, registration is open currently. We have an event coming in April, and so we want to see a full house of dads starting that'll be our first ever event in Nebraska. And then registration week for the remaining events that'll be starting up in August, September, and October. But registration week is April 23rd is where it begins at 9 a.m., Saturday, 9 a.m. And just so you know, especially those you guys in Montana and in Indiana, that last year, our events, we sold out most of our events in 48 hours. And so my recommendation, heard this from a dad, thought it was a great idea. He is gathering his buddies on April 23rd for breakfast.
Okay.
They're getting together. They're going to pick the date that they want to go to together, go to Dad Camp together. They're just going to look at all the different options. And then when 9 o'clock hits, they're going to have their laptops there ready to go. They're going to be boom, 9 o'clock, and they're going to register as part of their breakfast time together. And they're going to, what a great way to get.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
It's, if you're like most guys out there and your friends, it's always getting yourself to sign up for something and getting your buddies signed up. Is for whatever reason, this is a task for us guys.
Right.
So what a great way. Have a breakfast together, pick your moment, your weekend, and then boom, get signed up and don't miss out. You'll want to do that. So that's April 23rd at 9 a.m. And we'll also have options this year in Pennsylvania, in Tennessee. I feel like I'm forgetting one, but in Texas.
Texas, yeah.
In addition to Montana and Indiana. 17 dad camps in Indiana from August through October this year. 3 different locations to choose from. So 3 awesome locations. All the venues, guys, if you're trying to choose, there's not a bad option. We have vetted them, and they're awesome options. You're going to create incredible memories and with your kids at any of these dad camp locations. So, and lastly, continue to pray for our friends in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Just pray without ceasing. And pray specifically for Last Bell and for the Center for Training Success. Those 2 ministries are our partners. They're our friends. Lift them up, and we'll try to continue to update you through social media and email if you're in those chains and looking for those. As they inform us, we'll try to inform you. So as we always say, you have what it takes, Dad, so go do whatever it takes to be the strongest father that you can be. Share this podcast, rate this podcast. The more you rate it, there's a little 5-star button there. You give us that 5-star rating. The more ratings we get, the farther these podcasts get out, and the farther the range goes, we reach more dads. And so if you would even take a moment now and just rate it really quick. It's a quick touch of the button. Goes quick. That'll mean a ton. We've got a ton of increased viewership. You can watch this on our YouTube channel and listenership over the past couple of months. So keep it up. Keep sharing it. We appreciate you guys. And you have what it takes.
You have what it takes.
We'll see you next month.